Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we give you something new to watch, usually going week to week with some peak or non-peak TV. We have just wrapped up recently Paradise, the very successful Hulu series, continuing to cover Severance, which is wrapping up this very week. Very exciting, Sona.
So exciting.
And of course, today we will be discussing The White Lotus on HBO, or Max as it is called now, or both, I guess.
Does Cinemax still exist? That was something I wondered while I was signing on to the app yesterday.
Cinemax does exist, and it is very weird that Cinemax is not baked into Max, although they're both owned by the same company. All of this is bizarre. I don't understand.
None of it makes any sense to me. What was wrong with using HBO?
I
Because
don't know.
now, wouldn't most people assume Max means Cinemax? I don't know. It's
I do.
unimportant in the grand scheme, but I just don't understand it.
I have no idea, and people have mentioned this as well. Just the idea that they want to shy away from HBO, which is for decades now, and still is, by the way, quality wise. When something's on HBO, you know it's going to at least meet
Right.
some threshold of it's very well made. You may not like the story; it might, it may not be your cup of tea, but you know that, for example, when you watch The Last of Us, which is just coming back, and you may not like zombie shows, but you know that the production on this thing is going to be absolutely top notch. And that's part of the reason people show up to see the money on the screen, basically. And they spend money and they spend time making these shows like nobody else does. And this is their brand. And they're like, nah, let's not use that. It's like, why build a brand and throw it away? It's so
So bizarre.
bizarre, so bizarre. And they don't call it like Warner Brothers Television or whatever, using the Warner Brothers label, which of course is also has 100 years plus of history. It's really,
I
really
mean,
strange,
even for a while it was HBO Max, which
right?
is fine,
At
but
least they had that,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
because I collect apps like they're going out of style on my phone. And I went
right.
to find the app yesterday by using the search function and I put in HBO and nothing comes up. And I had to remember, oh, right, it's Max.
You literally are wondering, well, how do I watch my HBO shows? And you search for HBO, and it doesn't even lead you to the Max app. It's like they've thrown away the branding. It's bizarre. Anyway, the digression there, very bizarre. The whole Prime TV, this whole situation we're having with this peak streaming and now consolidation of these services. So a lot of shakeups in the next couple of years, for sure. But this show is The White Lotus, of course, on HBO/Max, episode 5, Full Moon Party. Sona, by the way, there's a couple things I needed to follow up with Darren, my other co-host, in
Hmm.
his episodes when I talk to him later this week. First of all, he has been in a Bollywood movie, and one of our listeners asked about this, and I'll definitely follow up with him on that. Let him answer for himself. We have actually talked about this off mic, but I don't
Hmm.
really remember all the details of it, and definitely don't remember the name of the movie. So if anybody wants to track that down, I'll ask him about it in our next conversation. And more importantly, he emailed me last week when he was listening to our coverage of White Lotus episode 4. He lives in Australia, and he mentioned that when he was younger, he went to a full moon party, and he says it's a wild time. So we definitely have to ask him about that in the next episode. Sona, I finished Adolescence, which I recommended last week. The fourth episode of this show was a real emotional knockout. I really recommend this. I think it's number one on Netflix, so it probably doesn't need my additional promotion. When it first came out, I feel like it was kind of under the radar, but word has spread. And this is a 4 hour, each episode is shot with one continuous take, a show about a girl who's murdered by one of her classmates, presumably. It investigates this idea of these parents and how they deal with how could we have potentially made this person, and are you responsible for their actions? And it deals with all of this in a very interesting way. The one ding I would say about this, it's called Adolescence, but I feel like I don't understand the kids in the show. But it's
Hmm.
still a very valuable thing to watch because I think that the perspective ends up being these parents who are alienated from their kids. In a way, it almost works like a horror movie in as a parent and seeing this happening to your children and how can we prevent this. And I
Hmm.
don't think it really gives us easy answers, but it does explore these things. And as I mentioned, I think that the finale has quite an emotional punch. So I do really recommend this show. And Sona, I have watched 8 episodes now, I think, of Deli Boys. I was just watching one right before we started recording. These episodes are 20 minutes long, so I literally can just slot them in whenever I have a little break. Almost watched half of one right now, just before we started recording. And this is very funny. Oh, by the way, a little bit more show news here is that we're going to be covering Dope Thief starting this week, which is about these long-term friends who pretend to be DEA agents and bust into drug dens and steal the drugs small time. And they stumble into something much bigger. And it takes place right outside Philadelphia. And Sona, in my headcanon, these shows exist in the same universe. I think
I love
it's
that.
an entertaining way to watch both of those shows.
I'm so happy that you also are enjoying Deli Boys because we are really loving it here.
I laugh. And I think I'm going to have to rewatch some of my favorite episodes of the show because they are so packed with jokes. I need to watch them again. But it's so fast paced. It feels like The Good Place or something, not in its content, obviously, but in the rapid fire jokes that are all character based. So it's like you really get to know the characters and they have a certain type of joke that they pull off. And it's just constantly happening. And all the characters are endearing, even though there are murders that take place in this. Is a bunch of endearing,
surprisingly violent, honestly.
very violent, yes, but simultaneously very funny and light, despite that fact. Yeah, a real blast. I've really enjoyed binging the whole thing. A couple more things. I saw Black Bag, the spy thriller.
Oh, how is that?
Sona, you would love this movie. You have to see it.
Really?
It is like living inside of a fashion magazine. Everybody looks incredible. The cast is incredibly attractive. The women wear these incredible dresses, even when they're at work. And outside, you see this kind of modernist architecture. And then they live in these incredibly beautifully appointed houses where everything is glass and modern. And Michael Fassbender likes to cook. And the way he cooks for his guests is like something out of one of those Netflix food porn documentaries. Everything is just absolutely beautiful. And Sona, there's just this incredible scene. They know that there's a mole in the company, and he is someone who is very good at identifying whether people are lying or not. By the way, the mole might be his wife, which is what instigates this whole plot. And they have everybody over for a dinner party, and they play a game where you have to tell a truth about the person to your right. And most of these people are couples. So and he has put like truth serum in the wine.
Oh my God.
So the conversation gets way too hot and heightened. You would love this. It's just a lot of people talking in rooms, looking absolutely incredible in beautiful locations. It is a very adult fantasy. And it is this big metaphor for being in a relationship. You have to have some level of trust and vulnerability. And of course, these people are spies who cannot trust or be vulnerable ever. So it is this really interesting metaphor for living in the modern world and trying to have a relationship and a marriage in this type of culture. It's a lot of fun. You should definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'm super interested in it. The commercial really piqued my interest.
It's directed by Steven Soderbergh, by the way, and I haven't liked all of his recent stuff, but this is very much in his Out of Sight / Ocean's 11 style, where everything is very stylish and sexy and warm, and the plot is very twisty and all kind of folds in on itself in the final moments. So it's very much going back to that style of his, which he hasn't really done in a while, but it's a lot of fun. I really highly recommend it. Oh, one more thing. Just today, Sona, when I went to try to watch one more episode of Deli Boys on my home screen on the Disney Plus app, Anora, the official release date on Hulu was tomorrow, Tuesday, which is the normal release day, but front page says Anora. So I clicked on it thinking it was just a trailer to announce that it's coming tomorrow. But no, I could actually just start streaming the movie. And my wife just yesterday was asking me, where can I watch Anora? And I'm like, oh, I think it's coming out on Tuesday. Well, everybody, it's already out. So I know Darren's been waiting to watch it. You've been waiting to watch it. My wife is waiting to watch it. Well, now you can watch it for free if you have Disney Plus. So kind of caveat there. If you have Hulu or Disney Plus, Anora is out. And do check it out. It's fantastic. Speaking of the Severance finale, Sona, I went to the Lumen facilities this weekend.
Yes, I saw.
I've not had a chance to put this out, but this is going to be some video content this week. Of course, last week we hit that 100 subscriber threshold. We're past it now, of course. And thanks everybody for subscribing. But do expect a video later this week. I went to the location where they shot the Severance exteriors and interiors, many of them. And it was quite a trip. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see that. Or, of course, I'll just include the link in the future. You don't have to subscribe to see the videos, but of course, if you subscribe, you'll know when they become available. Check the show notes if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And there will start being video content there, of course, including Sona later this week. We will be having our first video recap episode of the Severance season finale.
That's right.
Okay, this is a long episode. It's probably going to be a long conversation. So let's dig in. Okay, so this long episode, I think just over an hour long, picks up immediately after last week. Of course, this is now the full moon party. We still are not at the morning. So for anyone who doesn't know, the first season of White Lotus, even though it's a week of time, only takes 6 days because their trips are cut short by a tragic event. If you've seen that show, you know what I'm talking about. In the second season, we had 7 episodes, 7 days. This season, we had 8 episodes. So the idea of 8 episodes, 7 days, or would it be 8 days? What was the structure here? Well, apparently we have now spent this whole day on 2 episodes, and the night continues, by the way. Although I think I have a feeling that next episode we will be the morning. It will be the morning. We went pretty late into the night here this week. Sona, before we get into the breakdown, do you have any general impressions of the episode?
You know, when I scroll through Reddit, it feels like there's a general sentiment that the pacing is off, the show is moving too slowly, nothing is happening. First of all, as it's well established, in my opinion, if I watch people talking to each other, I'm happy. I don't need a lot to be happy with the show and the pacing. But more specifically, when I think about season 1 and season 2 in comparison, as far as I'm concerned, you know, I was not a huge fan of season 1 for a few reasons. I don't think much happened at all in season 1 ever. Sure. That's my recollection.
I agree.
It was a bunch of years ago now, right? But I don't feel like I ever watched an episode and thought a lot happened. You know, it was mostly at that point felt like you were supposed to be solving this mystery. Other than that, there wasn't like a lot of edge of your seat type plot development. Season 2, I think maybe the pacing was a little bit better. But still, I don't think, and this is much more recent, and I kind of would be interested in going over the general plots of each of those episodes. I feel like a lot built in those last couple of episodes as far as tension and stress and the energy of it. I think a lot of it was character development up until the end, but I could be remembering that wrong. So I don't necessarily feel that we are so much off track for what White Lotus is here. What do you think?
I like this episode. I would say that I'm probably about halfway through it. I did have some of that opinion where I felt like not enough is happening. Like maybe once again, internally, I am thinking that I'm expecting more fireworks. We have fireworks in this episode, by the way.
Literal fireworks.
Literal fireworks, yes. But not the kind that character dynamic fireworks. And that's kind of where I was once again in the middle of the episode. And then especially on revisiting it, I rewatched some scenes to take notes for this conversation. I really liked it. I felt like a lot of what the show is trying to say in this season about seeking and the reason we go to resorts, but also the mythology of the West, or the East, I should say, the Far East, and especially to Western eyes, and what that means, the maybe oversimplification of what that would mean, but also the real seeking that these people are facing. I really felt like it all started to culminate in this episode, and I really like that. Going back to season 2, I still prefer season 2. It's not that season 2 was action-packed. I just felt like for me, because I like the characters more, these little micro dramas in a single episode where is this girl going to be able to play the piano by sleeping with that guy who's going to get her the job? Is this swimming contest between these two guys who are trying to peacock around each other, and who's actually successful, who actually needs this relationship more than the other? You know, what that is on the surface and what that might actually mean. those are things I cared about in that season, those little micro
Yeah, I get that.
transactions, because I cared about the characters more. So that's really where my issue is here. And that's why I always correlate this back to season one. In season one, I do feel like things culminated. I think that it did explore some interesting ideas by the end. And that really was what the show was about, was revealing the relationships between these characters in the context of the show. With season two, I feel like there was that, of course, but then there was these additional dramas. Like, even if it was just like the girls are spending a night in town and the boys are back at the hotel with those prostitutes, that little micro drama mattered more because I cared about the characters more. It's basically what it comes down to. But even little dramas like that have not really occurred earlier in the season, you know? But that's just a different rhythm. Each season of this show has been different, and that's okay too.
I mean, I loved the couple dynamics
Me
of
too.
season
Yeah.
two. And,
Same.
I
That's
think
the show of these three shows. That's the version of the show I like the best. That's basically what it comes to.
and I think it was very relatable, right?
Yes.
Because
Mm-hmm.
who
Yep.
in a couple hasn't had that other set of couple friends that you have like very passive
Right.
aggressive thoughts about, and you're not even sure why you are friends, but here you are together on this outing and you're stuck. That, particularly in season two, is something I think that's missing here. I mean, I definitely have some relation to these middle-aged women, of course. That was a fun dynamic to watch play out because we could all relate to it so well.
The previous season, I think you put your finger on it. I related to all of that. Every one of those dynamics, I 100% related to it. In this show, it's like a bunch of annoying, young, rich, generic white kids. Don't relate to them. These extremely rich North Carolina don't relate to them, as opposed to like last season where it's like these couples that hang out together who are questioning, is money more important, or like how important are some of these things that we fixate on? I can 100% relate to that. This three generation of Mediterranean men who have very, very different perspectives on the world, completely relate to that, right? So it's like every story, I'm like, yep, I get you. Yep, I get you. And here it's just like three women being really catty together. I'm like, no, not really my experience. And it's just like, I really don't have any personal hooks in anything here. A hitman that's having this huge existential crisis, don't really relate to that either. Although I do like those types of stories, by the way, right? Love them, but just not something I personally am relating to.
Why is the hitman always having an existential crisis in movies?
He's a hitman. Of course he's having an existential crisis.
It's like an everyday problem in modern media.
But yes, how many hitmen are there? How many ER doctors are there? And their overrepresentation in popular culture. How many serial killers are there? It's, all these things are overrepresented. Okay, let's get into this story. Let's start with maybe the cleanest and maybe most entertaining element of this particular episode, which is the three ladies, which I really liked. In some ways, I haven't loved this storyline all the time. I liked all of this week, and this was relatable, this idea of trying to recapture your youth, and just this really taking advantage of the whole spirit of the full moon party. So Jacqueline, Kate, and Lori. By the way, I just wanted to point out that the three women were the three featured actresses or actors in the featurette at the end.
And I remember to watch it this time. I was so proud of myself. Usually, the preview for the next week ends, and I'm like, okay, done here, log out.
And Carrie Coon brings up the fact that Mike White wrote these characters because apparently he was on a resort, and apparently he goes to these resorts and watches people, as writers want to do anyway. This is part of his inspiration for these shows. But he mentioned that there were these three women who were always there when he was by the pool or at dinner and was always somewhere near him. They would always be talking continuously. So he's always curious as to like what their backstories were. And the dynamic was, as soon as one person left the table, the other two would talk about them behind their backs. So I think that is the inspiration, obviously, for these three ladies. But you start seeing a real feel for who they were in their youth and their dynamic at that time.
First, is there anything better than eavesdropping on people when you are out to dinner and you're actually in a setting where they're talking about something that sounds like super juicy and you can actually hear them really well? I love that. Like, there are times that my husband and I are out and he'll say to me in Spanish, "Be quiet, I'm eavesdropping." So I love the idea of how this originated. And I want to say that Carrie Coon said the exact line that I've said a couple of times in discussing this show. Part of what they're showing is wherever you go, there you are.
Yes, she
So,
specifically, explicitly said what you said before.
so I was
Exactly.
very proud of myself for that. How great was the way they shot those dance scenes?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right? Like you felt like you were there with them and having fun with them. And it was like beautiful to watch, and the
Yeah.
energy was there. I was very impressed with how they put all of that together.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. A couple of comments I had on the actual dance floor. First of all, is that Michelle Monaghan has this like come hither look, which is like a
Mhm.
weapon. That thing is like, it's an incredible power she has. And you saw a little bit of it in Bad Monkey also recently, but
Mhm.
they weaponize it, especially when she's looking at those younger Russian women
Right.
and they're jealous
Mhm.
and she's just shooting daggers at them with her eyes, but not in a mean way, like in an alluring way. It's like really a very sexy scene. And of all the sexiness on the dance floor, Leslie Bibb's character, of course, gets to be the stick in the mud, but that's her
Uh-huh.
character. So,
Yes.
but I was really impressed with Carrie Coon, who
Mhm.
has been playing this very stiff, more conservative person, and you really see her cut loose on the dance floor, and she would just seem like she was really having a good time and made the whole thing just so fun. So the girls just really loved seeing them, even, and once again talking about the dynamic, even seeing Kate be the stick in the mud, because you know that she was always the one in the friend group that kind of reined them in. So you kind of have a feel for that dynamic. Really well done.
Watching them dance, it was clear that two of them met in dance class and one of them did not.
Right. Good point. Good point.
I also identified very much with Kate in this episode, which I'm sure wouldn't surprise you as long as we have known each other, of kind of assigning myself to be the group mom. I'm going to make sure that everybody gets
Mm-hmm.
home in one piece. Hopefully, no one's going to throw up. If you are going to throw up, I will hold your hair back. I get where she was coming from.
In the club going days when I was much younger, I like the dynamic here of the way that everybody pairs off. This guy's definitely going to sleep with one of these girls tonight.
Mhm.
This guy might sleep with one of these girls tonight, and this guy's not going to sleep with anyone. So we put her with this. We put her with the mom. She has to babysit that guy too. That's part of her job.
Talked about his painful childhood.
Oh God, what a terrible digression every time they're trying to have some fun.
But I have to say, the way this has been set up, and maybe from prior White Lotus viewings, I'm bringing this to my watch of the show. I keep expecting things to go horribly wrong, right? So, like, when they are stuck in the water gun fight, I think that, oh, this is all an elaborate ruse for them to steal their bag, which is going to have their passports in it.
Yeah.
And here with those three Russian girls watching, I thought, oh, they're plotting something. I was very nervous. They left their bags
Mm-hmm.
behind at the table when they went to go dance. I know for some reason I'm obsessed with the idea that someone is going to be pickpocketed here. I don't know why.
It happens all the time.
It does happen all the time. And then when they went back to the table and the shots, I was skeptical of how they weren't there when the shots were poured, and maybe there's something in the shots. Did that occur to you, or am I just being hyper vigilant now?
I think you were being hyper vigilant. I didn't feel the danger in this particular set of
Okay.
in this part of the episode.
Because I thought, especially when Kate wouldn't do the shot, I thought
Oh
everybody
yeah,
else is going to be like high on some date rape drug, and only Kate
she'll be the only one.
will be the voice of reason here.
I like the detail that the young Russian women come over and they're not just looking at her like she might think, oh, maybe they recognize me or something and they're jealous of me. Turns out they know these Russian guys and they even argue with each other in Russian. Did you notice, by the way, that the Russian is not translated in the episode? I actually rewound it to be like, did
Yeah.
I miss the subtitles? Because in the featurette at the end, when they replay the scene, the Russian
Mhm.
subtitles are on. So I'm like, oh, maybe I can go back and see what they're actually arguing about. But nope, I guess when they put the episode together, they're like, it's better to not know what they're arguing about. But do you assume that this girl has a relationship with this guy, possibly?
I don't know if it was explicitly said, but I definitely had the conclusion that they were dating.
Yeah, it says they always fight like this. Someone actually says, right? So
Maybe
that makes it
that's
sound
why.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes it feel like that. And I mean, yeah, if they are actually dating, this is not cool.
Yes. Once again, I identified with Kate when she said, it's time to go.
Yeah, exactly. And that was smart of her too. Just kept it from getting uglier there. And guess what? Even though she really wanted to put a kibosh on the night, it actually just allows the party to migrate there, which is what everybody wanted probably anyway, without us potentially getting into like an ugly, cat fight inside of the club. And then clothes starts coming off. And this very much starts feeling like a high school, like when the parents are away and you invite a couple of the boys over to the pool.
Speaking of clothes, I forgot to say last week, but it continued on into this episode. I love all of the ladies' outfits here. I think they all look great.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Before the clothes come off, I want to say that.
Yeah, they all look great. Last week and this week, the same outfits, obviously. And yeah, it is, like Euphoria-like sequence. I'm talking about the HBO show, Euphoria, but with a bunch of middle-aged people in it who are trying to recapture those moments of youth. And they even talk about it in the Futurette, that it very much is that, right? These girls are sliding back into that dynamic. And you have, again, Kate in her oversized pajamas, sitting on the diving board or on the bed, on the chair, watching the girls let things get more out of hand.
It's a great pajama set, though, on the fashion subject.
Looks so cozy, right? Looks very cozy.
I mean, I just really identified with Kate so much this episode. That would absolutely be me, just sitting on the side. I'll have a ginger ale.
We have confirmation here that Laurie was a lawyer. She kills the vibe, by the way. That always happens. Like, I can think of so many nights that were like this, where, the middle of the night, things are all wild and crazy, and, you're meeting new people and the music's loud. And then there's that time at the end where everyone's kind of just burnt out and sitting around the table. And there's that one person who's still just like going on and on about whatever's. And you're like, I think this is the end of the night.
Yes, absolutely.
This is interesting here at the end of the night. Also, I like the dynamic of there's that other Russian guy. Honestly, I have to tell you that Valentine and this other Russian guy looked too similar to each other, where I'm like, is that Valentine?
I agree. Yes.
They were way too similar looking. He makes a move on Laurie. Laurie, of course, wants Valentine. Valentine wants Jacqueline. And of course, poor Kate is stuck with that other guy talking about his dead parents. Mm-hmm. But that's probably how she likes it too, because she's like, nothing's happening here. That's okay.
Why was your sister so mean?
Okay, before we circle back to that final scene between Jacqueline and Valentine, let's talk about guy talk for a little bit. He uses that as an excuse to go back, something he was planning to do anyway, which is to see Mook perform, looking absolutely beautiful. Lalisa, this actress. This guy's not a detective here, but luckily he has cameras. So confirmation that Tim indeed took his gun and he's looking to run into him. He corners him in the bathroom and he denies having the gun, of course. This guy should not have this job.
He's not cut out for it whatsoever. Yes. I mean, the amount of time he took even to approach Tim.
Yeah, exactly.
Is ridiculous, especially when he's left his post unattended. Apparently, there's no like backup guy that can sit there. I don't understand that staffing. It was a very long time in my mind to be away from your post, especially considering the events of the last few days.
Absolutely. It all seems crazy. This guy is so not cut out for this job. He won't even just walk up to the guy at the table and be like, I need to talk to you for a minute. Like, he should have been a little more assertive. That might have intimidated Tim into giving the gun back. He's so meek. I mean, I've really liked this character and I like how sweet he is with Mook. This is absolutely wrong. He wants to be a bodyguard or something? No way. It's not.
I've been more confrontational talking to customer service representatives over an online chat than he was trying to get a gun back.
And supposedly he really needs this job, or at least wants to impress Mook. He has to do something about this. He's worried about it when he sees Fabian and he questions him multiple times saying like, are you okay? What's going on? He even tells him it's okay for him to watch Mook, but only for a little bit, because like you said, he's left this place unattended and he's in there for like half an hour watching her perform and trying to track down Tim at the same time. Yeah, he needs to be way more assertive or he's not going to get anywhere. We don't really have anything to say about Mook other than seeing her in her lovely outfit performing this week.
Agree. She looks beautiful. Yeah. That's about it.
Which is kind of how he's perceiving her at that moment too. Okay. Now we're going to get into some much meatier topics. Let's start with the rat lifts. I like them a lot better this week. I start thinking that a lot of these things start to coalesce for me a little bit, except for one glaring exception, which is, and maybe we still need to see this episode, I feel like Piper has still not even been defined as a character yet, really.
I've already grown to like the parents. I like both of them. The kids, the jury's still out in a lot of ways. The big shocker for me this episode was Saxon being the likable one.
Yep.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, you know what? Let's break out Saxon and Lachlan and Chelsea and Chloe as like a separate topic,
Sure.
and just talk about Victoria and Tim and Piper at dinner together. Piper basically announcing here that this was a lie about her thesis, which explains how inactive she's been around that this whole entire time, but that she's actually here to feel it out, test the waters, because she actually wants to stay here for a year and wants her parents to sign off on this. Then it starts a really interesting conversation, made more interesting by the fact that, of course, Tim is now having this crisis of faith about the decisions he's made and trying to perform this perfect life that Victoria still seems to believe is not only attainable, but is proper and is the only possible outcome for anybody, even though, of course, it's a very limited perspective she could possibly have. It's funny to think about the fact that Tim would probably be 100% in agreement with her if it wasn't the fact that he's about to lose all of this. And now he starts thinking that maybe her rejecting all of that is not such a bad idea, because at least she would be outside of this, the blast zone of what's about to happen to their lives potentially.
I thought he was going to ask Piper if he could stay there with her.
He might be contemplating it. That might be the end of this episode. He might just go to the monastery and lock himself in there and leave everybody else to deal with this situation.
Okay, whoever wrote this gave Parker Posey all the comedic lines. This was
yes,
amazing. This whole exchange. You want to move to Taiwan? Like, does she even know what country she's in?
She doesn't, apparently, yes.
Is this,
or they're interchangeable in her mind.
Has the lorazepam run out? Is this a withdrawal? Is she back on the lorazepam? It's unclear to me if there was anything left in the bottle at the end of last episode. Her whole framing of it as Christianity versus Buddhism, she's not even Chinese or whatever she
right.
said. All of it was just brilliant. And I love what Parker Posey did with it. I thought it was amazing.
I feel like Victoria's been a lot of a caricature of this character for so long, but I actually know people who talk exactly like this. And by the way, we probably all to some extent have some level of this kind of cultural blindness. She's saying these things overtly that most people wouldn't say, but the idea that you can't be a Buddhist if you're not Chinese, for example. And then she says, well, you're not from
Bethlehem.
She's not from Bethlehem, right? So how could she be a Christian? And that's what's annoying about her, but sympathetic to a whole generation and maybe a whole culture of people. Victoria's perspective. It's not even about where your people are from, specifically from the culture of that religion. It's just the fact that, but everyone we know. So it's like this need to just fit in. And she even says it overtly later on. What are people going to say about us? She's so caught up on like, what are people going to perceive about us if Piper makes this decision? You see how this is actually starting to grate on Tim, but Tim doesn't seem to blame her. I think he's internalizing this because I'm sure he feels like that's what he signed up for. That's what he's been presenting his whole entire life. And now he is having this kind of crisis of faith in his own decisions up to this point.
But also, and I think you touched on this earlier, as over the top as all of this is, anybody can write a book. Hillary Clinton wrote a book.
Yes.
I wrote 5 books, whatever it
right.
may be. As over the top as it is, I do think at bottom, there is a point there that is somewhat valid as to Piper specifically. Right. I'm not saying that nobody can decide to stay at a meditation retreat for a year in Thailand, no matter how they've been raised. Of course they can. But on what basis is Piper making this decision? What does she know of this, practically speaking, aside from theoretically what she studied in college and like a 1-hour visit to the monastery? I think there is a point being made here of like, what are you even deciding? You're completely ignorant as to what you're even talking about. I would even understand if Piper said, I want to spend a month there. She's ready to say, I'm going to be here for at least a year. Based on what?
This is what I like so much about this show and just Mike White's writing in general. If you see Enlightened, this is a great HBO series he made with Laura Dern, which everybody should watch if you haven't seen it. And it's about this woman who is one of the most insufferable, the Laura Dern character, one of the most insufferable people you'll ever meet, and how she takes down, or she tries to take down, this large corporation she works for. She's doing something noble, but for all the wrong reasons. It does this incredible trick that you see here also. It's not that you agree with both perspectives, it's that you disagree with both perspectives. And he writes it so well, where you want to root for Piper to not be this superficial person who just buys into this luxury and all the amenities that her parents have provided to her without questioning it. But then you feel like she hasn't done the homework to earn that respect to some extent. And then you want to agree with Victoria as she chastises her daughter. But of course, Victoria's perspective, even when she's in the right, is so small-minded and so culturally biased that you can't really agree with her either. And I really like that. Like you said, the tension there, the person you want to root for, you really can't. She's saying things that are valid, but couching it in maybe the wrong context. I agree. I really like this dynamic. I completely agree that maybe Piper needs to be more well-defined. But other than seeing her meditating here momentarily at the end of this episode, do we really feel that she has done the work to make this 1 year experience worthwhile? But then, of course, Victoria is couching it as in, what if you are successful? Not if you fail at this and you were like, oh, well, you were an idiot. She gets to make fun of her for the rest of her life about it. It's the opposite. She's like, what if you do become a Buddhist and then we lose you, and that you like acquire new morals from the ones we gave you, quote unquote. She literally says that. I feel that too, right? I think we probably both come from cultures. Our parents think that they gave us their cultural beliefs and we're not supposed to disagree with them.
Very true.
I related to having those conversations of, wait a second, I didn't raise you like that, as if like you can't have your own thoughts. You're supposed to think what I told you to think. So that doesn't make me empathetic to Victoria. But then I do question significantly whether Piper has done the work or whether this is just a flight of fancy.
And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe they have run out of lorazepam, because
she has.
Him sitting at that table looks like he's absolutely, completely in mental overdrive, trying to process everything that's happening around him and not zonked out the way he was the prior week.
She specifically says, because he stole her lorazepam, that she has to drink herself to sleep because she doesn't have any lorazepam.
Yeah.
Reality is creeping in. I also think that it's interesting here that Victoria specifically mentions, initially she says, how can you be a Buddhist instead of a Christian? Piper throws in her face, they weren't even raised Christian. Like the kids, I guess, didn't go to church. So what? And Victoria's like, that doesn't matter. It's just about appearances. But then there was a little surprising moment here, and special shout out to Jason Isaac performing here when Piper talks to her about the family not really being religious. He talks about being an altar boy when he was younger, and he starts singing this hymn, which actually gets repeated in the credits at the end. The way he's kind of longing for something. And I did wonder, I think thematically there is this idea, hedonism, that the physical world, it's explicitly said multiple times that there has to be something more than this. And I do wonder if him remembering maybe when life was simpler, or when the moral contract that you learn as when you're first learning about religious beliefs was simpler. But there's something there, some longing he has, or maybe he's just thinking about his own mortality, considering what he's considering.
I took it as reflecting on his own mortality, especially because it might be at the very end that we see him praying.
Right. He prays at the very, very end. Yep.
He feels like he's at a dead end, and maybe this will be his salvation, which, is a popular idea, right? A lot of people find religion when they feel they've hit rock bottom.
Yep.
That's kind of how I read it. What did you think?
He probably is thinking about the simplicity of the, religious narratives we learn when we're young, and him probably being an altar boy and hearing the hymns and the stories, the Psalms, and believing the stories, something that he probably doesn't have, or doesn't at least think about now that he's older. If he's truly contemplating suicide, then of course, mortality itself is a question here. But I also think it's interesting that he didn't push back that much on Piper's decision, because I do think that he is seeing the limitations of his own decision-making, right?
He was mostly silent, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So I
Well,
felt like that's what I'm saying when I'm
yeah.
saying it feels like his mind's in overdrive. It feels like he's just been overloaded with information and is trying to just process it and sort it into categories internally so that he doesn't have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't explicitly tell her, I'm on board with your plan. I think it's more the fact that Victoria turns to him, waiting for him to jump in on her side, which I think that would be his knee jerk reaction just a week earlier. Now he's like, well, and then he's
Yeah,
like, I gotta go.
right.
But just the fact that well for that second makes me wonder if he is torn inside.
Yeah, and obviously has much bigger stuff going on if he's not angry that his daughter has made them all go to Thailand for a thesis that does not exist
Exactly.
to a five-star resort.
The amount of money they spent, which is probably significant even for a rich person. Context being different, he probably been very annoyed at the situation.
I think any parent would be.
Absolutely. Okay, if you're in their situation, if you're Victoria, Sona, what do you say to your daughter? Are you like, it's only a year of your life? Experiment, try it out? Or are you like, no way, you're a flake?
I think I would say, you try this for a month. I will come back here and check on you in a month, and then we'll decide what to do.
Yeah, a year's a long time, right?
Yeah. What would you do if your daughter said that to you?
I was giving it more than a month, but I had the same idea of being like, hey, I can always come here and like pull you out by your ear if I have to, unless you are blowing some huge, great opportunity somewhere else. I think that seeking is not necessarily a bad thing. Even if you go into it for the wrong reasons, it's an experience that you'll have for the rest of your life. So, all right, let's continue the conversation with Saxon and Lachlan, but also, we have Chelsea and Chloe here. And I do think that let's talk about all four of them.
Sure.
Although the Saxon Lachlan dynamic is actually interesting for maybe the first time here in the show.
Agree. And I hope this is the end of.
Oh, it's
We'll get
not.
there. We'll get
It's
there.
not. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure it's not. Earlier on in the episode, before they hook up the four, go on this night out together, where the ladies are really talking about them, but they're really talking about themselves, and they're talking about the relationship with these two grumpy old men that they
Hmm.
have. It's really interesting revelations here, to be honest. Chloe has or had a real relationship with Greg. I thought that there was a real difference, that that show had illustrated this real difference between the relationship between Chelsea and Rick versus Chloe and Greg. And now I'm like, well, maybe given what Chloe says, that Chloe is simply in the situation that Rick and Chelsea are in currently, but that's how it used to be, right? That now they're in another phase of the relationship. He apparently showered her with attention when they first were together. And you were wondering, like, why is she with this old guy? But she overtly says it, that what she primarily wants is the attention. And maybe he just showered her with gifts and attention. And that was something that attracted her to him. But of course, as time's gone by and Greg is just a miserable, miserable person, all that misery came back. And of course, the relationship now is totally toxic again. But I did find it interesting to imagine these women are basically at just different cycles in the same trajectory, although maybe Rick can still redeem himself. A couple of other interesting points here. Chloe explicitly says that she's afraid of Greg, that he could actually be violent if he found out that she was unfaithful. And of course, Chelsea saying that she does not want to be unfaithful, that she actually is a romantic and wants to make it work with Rick.
I like both of these characters quite a bit. I'm not sure I saw the parallel there that
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing. And actually, as you were talking about it, I was remembering back to when Tanya, the
Yeah.
Jennifer Coolidge character,
Mm-hmm.
met Greg and wondering if maybe that's how they started as well. But I
Right.
don't think so. I think there was always some kind of conflict between them, but maybe because he was being sneaky, right? Like going on his fishing trips or whatever in
Yeah.
that season one. But it does turn ugly between them in season two, right? Like at that point, they're clearly not in a good place. Like
Right.
something sniping about chocolates, like something like that seems to be coming to mind.
Yeah.
I would think I was trying to create a parallel there that probably doesn't exist as you were talking. I just feel like Chelsea and Rick have a deeper relationship than Chloe and Gary slash Greg. For whatever reason, it feels more emotionally connected
Yeah.
between Chelsea and Rick. So I think while like the demographics of it are similar,
Right.
I think there's more true emotion and feeling behind their relationship.
I agree with that. I'm just saying that it feels to me maybe like this is a ghost of Christmas future type situation where if Rick does not resolve his issues and she continues to cut him off, and of course, the way that Rick keeps cutting Chelsea loose, Chloe has probably been cut loose multiple times while Greg's just kind of like, you do your thing. I got stuff to do on my own. This could be their future. There still is hope. I agree completely that Rick and Chelsea have something more real. And Greg is, never seemed to be as soulful as Rick seems to be here.
Right. I think that's the difference for me. I get what you're saying completely. I guess for me, knowing the Greg/Gary character as always being shady and duplicitous, and
right.
Rick, it feels like he's hiding stuff from Chelsea to protect her.
Right.
Not because he just wants to be sneaky. Whereas Greg/Gary, it feels like he hides stuff. I don't feel like he cares so much about protecting either Tanya or Chloe. It just feels like these women are secondary in his life and he's got a whole other agenda. Whereas I don't feel like Chelsea is secondary. I think Rick just has a lot of walls up.
Sure. I agree with all of that. So they do end up heading out with the boys. Chloe very much, first of all, seems to want to have an actual sexual encounter that includes Chloe. I think that's part of the appeal here. But of course, she also very much wants her nerdy little magician. She's talking about how much she likes young guys because she gets that attention. She likes to see the heart pounding in their chests when they're together with each other, and how, basically Greg has become totally inured to her appeals, I guess, over time.
That's young, though.
That's really young. It's true, right? That's as young as it gets, pretty much.
Yeah,
but, I mean maybe
I
that
like
is
the
part
Chloe
of the appeal.
Character, but that's
that might be
young.
Yeah. Also intercut with this conversation is the conversation between the brothers. And I do like when Saxon goes like, oh, that girl definitely wants to be with you. And the other one, I really want to hook up with her because she hates me so much, which is part of the attraction. But it is a kind of unfortunate too, because if this ends up happening, and it does seem like it is about to happen, that means that Chloe does end up with Saxon. And I really don't think that Chloe likes Saxon very much at all. So it is.
No.
That's going to be do you foresee that they end up together, they'll hook up in the next episode?
I just don't know. I don't know. I hope not.
I guess the night could go in a different direction. I guess the night.
My wants and desires for this plot line are interfering with my assessment of what is actually going to happen. I hope not. I kind of want these four to stay away from each other after all that happened.
I really don't want Chelsea to hook up with him either. I agree. That would be like probably bad for both of them, honestly.
But at least she doesn't think Rick will kill her.
Yes, there's always that. She's pretty confident that he won't. Oh, also as part of their conversation between the brothers, I thought there's a lot of Buddhism actually introduced specifically into this episode, probably into the show more subtly. There's this conversation where Saxon has this perspective very hedonistically of like the world is about eating everything you can, manipulating what you can get and playing a part until you get what the thing you want. And Lachlan, the younger one, and I think this is what's interesting here in this dynamic, that Saxon reveals himself to be the more naive character here. And Lachlan says, but what if this whole world is a test for the next? Which, of course, is a very Buddhist idea. And maybe that's coming from Piper, potentially. I also like Saxon's response to this being like, what? No. Like, only the physical world is real. What are you talking about? We can now talk about Saxon. I really like this role reversal. All of a sudden, Lachlan is the one who's willing to take the MDMA, and Saxon's like, no, I'm with the drug. I don't take drugs. And then taking the drugs and actually losing a little bit of control and being blown away by just dancing and being in the moment and looking at the fireworks. It's like he is having his eyes open for the first time. He's like having this transcendent experience in Thailand because of drugs, not because of meditation. Nonetheless, is having his eyes opened for the first time. If anybody needs ego death, Saxon needs it, and maybe he's achieved a little bit of it here.
we started to see the last episode, what felt like a very normal brotherly relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like
Yep.
rooting for his little brother, trying to
Yep.
set things up for him. And here also, it felt a little bit like he's the older brother. He's going to be the responsible one. Besides his own image and persona of he doesn't do drugs, he just has protein shakes.
Right.
It also felt a little bit like he's going to keep his feet on the ground and make sure that his brother is okay. Like, I thought it was nice, that dynamic between them.
I think you made a good point there. I was seeing it more from the perspective of him having this kind of code of conduct that he rigidly complies with. I think you make a good point that earlier on he was trying to be the responsible one, especially because he was out with his brother. So I do think that there's an aspect of that. But yeah, it's like a transformational night for him. And then we get to the kiss, the kiss. So I knew this was going to happen too, just the way it's set up as the episode is playing out. But they're,
Yes.
playing their little, the girls are like, you kiss him, we'll kiss each other. I'm like, oh, well, here we go. And then they do like the little peck on the lips. But the important part here is that then Lachlan goes in for a longer kiss with his brother. And Saxon seems like really blown away by this. So, how do you read this scene, which obviously has been teased here throughout this whole season so far?
Yeah, well, this is kind of the turnaround I didn't expect in that
Yeah.
they had painted Saxon to be that predator, date rapey, fraternity brother type.
Mm-hmm.
And here you see that it seems like actually his brother is the one being the predator, where, before we had seen him, the whole thing with the posture therapist and your feminine side and
Yep. Yep.
all of that, he had been portrayed to be kind of submissive or meek, but here, not so much.
Right.
I mean, really, the whole night, he's kind of been leading Saxon a little bit with taking
Yeah.
the drugs. For me, this was unexpected. Not like shocking unexpected, but I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, I wanted to spend a minute just talking about Saxon as well. That I think the show, for the longest time, my least favorite character on this whole entire show, and it just seems so one note, was this Saxon character.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really enjoyed the performance, although I knew what they were going for. And I worried that it would just continue to be one note and they wouldn't get to a point where it would pay off. And I really felt in this episode, it does pay off. Seeing him suddenly, the shoe's on the other foot, and he is the one who's out of his depth in multiple instances here after trying to be the real worldly guy and leading his brother. And even on the ship when he was falling to that dynamic last week, which we both really liked, being the wingman for his brother, very comfortable in that role. And also, I think very true to not only necessarily sibling relationships, but definitely amongst friends. When you suddenly have somebody who maybe is always in the back seat and suddenly is in a circumstance, it could be whatever. You could just be visiting them at school or visiting them in their hometown and going back with them, that suddenly they're the ones who know their way around and this dynamic change.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people will lean into that. I enjoy being in the driver's seat right now. I really feel that in the Lachlan performance as well. He's only like a senior in high school. He probably hasn't done MDMA a bunch of times, but he is more expert at it now all of a sudden than his brother is, or at least willing to be. Then you feel that dynamic shift. And it happens here as well, I think, with the kiss, putting his brother in a position where he knows he's making his brother uncomfortable. So I did like the dynamic shift. The only caveat I have there is that I feel like I've been annoyed by the incest baiting that they've been doing over the course of the season. And it does pay off here. And I said this to you off mic. I think this would have been a powerful moment. And it is even a powerful moment in the moment, just the way it's photographed and everything. But I think it would have worked a little bit more if we see Saxon having a revelation that hasn't been teased multiple times. But what do you think that revelation is? Do you think it's about his sexuality? Do you think he's just surprised that his brother is suddenly in charge? Like, what do you think? Or a combination, maybe both?
I think that he hasn't seen this side of his brother before and didn't think his brother had it in him to do something like this and is possibly alarmed about it. I hope he's alarmed about it. How did you read it?
He doesn't seem alarmed in his reaction, though. It seems like he's having some kind of epiphany. That could just be the drugs, which is giving him an additional layer of expression that the actor has here in the moment as well. He seems troubled by what's happening for sure, but he doesn't seem necessarily having a negative experience. I
Well,
do
I
like
had a
Lachlan's.
negative experience, Victor.
Yes. I did like Lachlan's expression, though. There's a really cool back and forth between the two of them where he's like checking him as he drinks the beer to see like his brother's reaction, which I like how they're testing each other here, which of course is very sibling dynamic, but in a very creepy context here
Yeah.
specifically.
Maybe I'm struggling here because of my distaste for this whole thing. And I am an only child, but is this as icky as it feels to me?
It is for me. This is extremely icky, I think. Yes, absolutely. On the other hand, I do know that siblings tell stories being young, but not this age, right? Like
Yeah,
being younger.
young, like
Yeah, yeah.
6 and 7,
Right.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Sisters practicing kissing on each other, for example, when they're very young. The idea that you would do that when you are, adults basically is, I think it's always creepy.
Yeah.
Especially if they are truly full blood. I liked your theory a few episodes back, which I guess hasn't been crystallized here, but since they haven't announced it yet, I don't think they're going
Yeah,
to, that
I
this could
agree.
be multiple marriages. I think they are full siblings. And yeah,
Uh,
so we're back in the creepy zone for sure.
uh,
Yeah, if these were two friends who had this dynamic, this would be a really fun scene. But it's
I
or
agree.
or intriguing, what I should say, minimally. As siblings, it is too creepy. Like for example, like seeing the girls experiment
Right.
in this way, and that is very entertaining and very true to life. I think oftentimes, especially with girlfriends. But this is brothers. I don't know, not really cool. And I'm certain that there'll be fallout from this next week.
I wish there wasn't. I wish we never had to talk about this again. But
Oh, that's what I was telling you. I'm pretty sure that there's is definitely going to be addressed. It's going to be thematic in the show in some way, for sure. Let's move over to more pleasant conversation. Belinda and Porn Chai.
oh, yes.
So first of all, we find out what that noise is. There's been a lizard trap in her room for multiple days now. Poor guy. She freaks out when she gets released. Does not like any kind of creatures around her, by the way, especially not the idea that she'd been living with one this whole entire time.
Can I tell you something that is a
Sure.
complete tangent, but this actually reminds me of?
Sure.
In my house where I grew up, for the longest time, people would hear footsteps, and we always assumed that the person upstairs was hearing the person downstairs or vice versa. Then there would be a time that there was just one person alone in the house hearing the footsteps. And of course, as a South Asian family, we figured, well, there's a ghost, and that explains it.
Right.
And so we all accepted there was a ghost living in the house. Turned out to be a family of raccoons.
Yes. My parents had a family of raccoons living in their attic as well.
Must be a neighborhood issue.
So all those ghost hunter shows could just turn out to be finding rodents in the attic.
Yeah, so this kind of reminded me of that.
And I do want to talk about them. We'll save it for those final moments because, of course, that's one of the big final moments here in the episode. But before then, so of course, we've seen that Greg has something to take care of at home. He mentions ominously last week. I mean, doesn't seem to do anything aggressively towards her yet. However, turns out when she goes to talk to Fabian that he has been asking questions about her, and she goes, I feel unsafe. What do you think about this interaction? I thought it was kind of telling. Fabian has this attitude of, well, that's an uncomfortable thing that we don't want to accuse our customers of. So let's not address it. And on the one hand, they do a pretty good job here of letting her get more hysterical. So maybe she starts sounding like she's a little crazy. And of course, he's only known her for a few days. So he doesn't know whether he should trust her or not. Maybe she's just overreacting. But if she's like, I've done the research and I have these articles, which she shows to Porn Chai later on, by the way, she should forward those links over to Fabian right away, because this is, he doesn't seem to want to know what's actually going on. And maybe that's his general opinion of things. She does have some pretty hard evidence. They literally, in that article, say they're looking for this missing husband, and she has a photograph of him from his profile on that land surveying website. So someone should look into this for sure.
There were a couple times that I felt like the characters were acting the exact same way I would act in this
Yes.
episode.
Mm-hmm.
One of which we haven't gotten to yet. I felt like as soon as Belinda started explaining herself, I was thinking, just send him the link.
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
never going to make sense. Just
Right.
send him the
Yes,
link.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
at the end, when she said, I'll send you the link, and he says, please do. I actually love that because I thought it was very accurate portrayal of what should happen. And I kind of liked Fabian's response because to me, it sounded like, listen, lady, there are murderers left and right in this building. I cannot start nailing down the problems with all of our guests. It's just going to open a barrel of monkeys. How's that for a monkey reference? We just are going to look the other way because everybody's got something to hide here.
Yeah, I mean, but if she could potentially be threatened by identifying him, he should take it a little more seriously. I would think.
He said he thinks she'll survive.
He thinks so. He thinks so. I take his general point that you're in Thailand and you're like, if I had to do background checks on every person who shows up here, I'd never stop, right? So, but I mean, if she's like, I think one of these sketchy people, which you are admitting shows up at this resort on a regular basis, might be threatening me, maybe.
Hopefully, he'll read the link.
That's what I'm concerned with, that he's going to ignore it and be like, I don't even want to know. I just realized as I was about to say this, that they don't have their devices on them. But like I would, to your point, I'd have all my research on the phone and be like, see, every single one of these things.
The way she was explaining it, it did make sense as someone who understands what happened. But if you're just hearing all of that for the first time, it probably is kind of a little overwhelming. I'm sorry, you know him from where? And he is accused of doing what? And how do you know that? So hopefully he will read the link.
It does send her into the arms of Porn Chai, though, which finally is what she maybe needed for them to have that night together. Okay, before we get to the very end, of course, we have to talk about maybe a main thing we have to talk about here in this episode. And thematically, I think it ties into so many things here on the show. This interaction between Rick and Frank. First of all, you were right. I was like, well, are they going to go all the way to Bangkok? And you said, well, the show has allowed them to go off the grid to the island. But I'm like, yeah, but they're like right off the coast. Will they go all the way to Bangkok and follow Rick there? Apparently, yes, you were right, Sona. They followed Rick all the way to Bangkok.
And I love that because understandably, in the first season, they were dealing with COVID, so they couldn't really leave the hotel. But I was frustrated then there weren't even any references to, where we went this morning or the tour we have booked for tomorrow, which I think is a much more realistic type of vacation. There are certainly vacations where you just stay on the resort, but those tend to be in like the Caribbean islands more, where there's so much to see. I like there being acknowledgments that people do leave and go other places, even if it is to possibly kill somebody.
They also have a lot more money to spend. Once again, I think that White Lotus season 1 was just kind of a trial balloon, like what can we shoot during COVID? And shooting it all in one place where you have very few cast members that even have scenes together. And if you plan them ahead of time, you can kind of shoot them in batches, which is pretty much what they did there. And of course, with season 2, after the success of season 1, the budget went way up. So even though they were around one particular locale, they were able to set up in many locations. You can only imagine the increase in production costs between season 1 to season 2. And now, hey, let's fly to Bangkok. They have as much money as they want for this production. Yeah, I mean, I do like to see the show changing what it is across, as the budgets get bigger and as the ambitions maybe get bigger as well. Sam Rockwell shows up here. Total surprise, was not announced. This is the second time they've had a surprise. I guess the third time that they've surprised us. We had no idea from the trailers that Greg was going to be in here, bringing him back. We have Tim's partner. Turns out to be a celebrity as well. Questionable whether we see him turn up on the show. And now, of course, Sam Rockwell showing up here as his friend Frank that he's been talking to on the phone. By the way, Sam Rockwell is Leslie Bibb's longtime partner. So they are actually not married, I don't believe, but they've been together for over a decade at least. And this was a really fascinating scene. And once again, this idea of seeing Greg as this possible outcome for who Rick might end up being someday. Now we have Frank, another person that he had all these assumptions about, meeting up with Frank, and it's going to be a wild night. Frank parties way too hard. And instead we find out that he is now clean and sober and celibate. And he's gone through this journey, to say the least, Oh, yeah. Before we move on to that whole entire conversation, just to mention that he, of course, gives him this bag and says, I hope you don't have to use this. That's pretty much all we needed to know, that there's going to be a gun in that bag, along with some other supplies, maybe a change of clothes, etc. And of course, we explicitly see the gun by the end of the episode. But this was a really fascinating conversation. Frank came to Thailand because he liked Asian women and he loved the party and he could just get away with murder out here. And it became more and more and more. He embraced this full hedonism until it was desensitizing. And then he started to go on a spiritual quest of a kind, saying, like, what am I really seeking here? This is a very Buddhist idea, by the way, that he's doing this through a hedonistic lens, which is interesting in its own way. But, like with that, let's keep this PG-13, this eventually leads him to start to ask himself, well, what if I want to experience what she's experiencing? And then gets to a point where he literally is having, once again, a very Buddhist type of experience, seeing himself as the penetrator and penetratee at the same time. So it's this very weird hedonic experience he goes on. But eventually, this leads him to believe that hedonism is not the way to reach enlightenment. And I do want to put a pin in that because I think we can circle back to other characters coming that same revelation. But I do want to spend another minute in this particular scene. I think this is what you were hinting at earlier. I laughed out loud when I'm just laughing, remembering it now. I laughed out loud. Walter Goggins.
Amazing.
Listening to this story and trying to be sympathetic. And at first, I think really being like, I know what you're talking about. And being like, And then there's this moment when he is like just open mouth, taking this all in. It's like he's trying to come up with something to say.
Yes.
And he just like shakes his head without saying a word and goes,
I actually wondered if, and I'm sure this is not the case, but if he was hearing that story for the first time as it was being filmed, because it was like his reaction was mirroring my reaction of like eyes getting a little bit bigger, mouth dropping open, like a little intake of breath when the story takes yet another unexpected turn. Like every time you think he's done, he
goes on
something else to add on to the story.
God.
It was like exactly the journey I was on, Rick was on.
I rewatched this scene today just for his reaction, which just it made me laugh so hard multiple times last night. And just like you said, just him like mouth open, eyes widening, and trying to be like a good friend to his friend, just be like, oh, okay. And I love when he's like, you know what I mean? And he's like, I was part of the way there with you.
Oh my gosh.
Oh God. As funny as this scene is, it is the heart of this episode in a way. And that's what I like seeing, the thematics of the show tying together, is this idea of being on this hedonic wheel and being in this resort and being in Thailand, which is known popularly as a place to really cut loose and do whatever you want. You know, this whole like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but to the nth degree out in Thailand, I should say. So I think it's interesting that we see this character kind of coming to the end point there, and maybe what has been hinted at multiple times, this spiritual journey that Rick is on, right? We've seen it multiple times when he's talked to his meditation leader in the previous episodes. And we see that he is yearning for something, revenge potentially, but maybe something more than that. He thinks revenge will give him something, but maybe it won't. And I think it really ties into multiple journeys we're on here. You think about Tim, who's about to kill himself just because he's not going to be rich anymore, and what he expected to achieve in his lifetime. You think about Jacqueline, who now is achieved this level of fame she never had when she was younger, and this young husband, and all these things that supposedly are these huge achievements in her life. And now she's just afraid of losing them, right? It's that whole Buddhist mantra that the things you own eventually own you, and that they're all trapped by these circumstances in their lives. I just had this conversation recently with my wife. When you think about someone like Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, we were talking about both of these people that at a very early age, because of all the pressures they put on themselves and the talent they had, and maybe just their own psychoses were fixated on being like, I want to be the most famous person in the world. And then they actually achieve it, this absolutely impossible thing of becoming the most recognizable person on the planet. And then because, of course, anything like that is fleeting. And as soon as you lose it, you go into full desperation. You can't just be on that treadmill of more, because there can never always be more. More is never going to satiate you eventually. But what did you think about how this ties into not only, of course, Frank's journey here specifically, and Rick's reaction to it, or the lesson he might take from it, how this also ties into maybe like the crises that Victoria is probably going to face, although she's probably blind to it at this moment, or definitely blind to it. But then you think about what Piper maybe is rejecting, what Jacqueline is the trap maybe Jacqueline's falling into here, and Tim, of course.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. And I think I was so taken aback by that story at the time that perhaps I didn't really think about it in that context. So I appreciate that. And I do think it's not an uncommon story to hear about someone just deciding to reject all the material things in their life and kind of pare it all down and start from scratch, right? At the same time, I think the way the world is today, and for these particular people, it's a luxury to have that option.
Right.
Some people are kind of on a hamster wheel where they don't even have the option of getting off, which I think Timothy kind of is, right? He's kind of being faced with that choice, not of his own making.
Right.
I think it's an interesting commentary on, materialism and what we think we need in order to survive when really we don't need much.
Right.
But then at the same time, practically speaking, that's something that's a lot easier said than done, not just because of the comforts that we've grown accustomed to, but also just because of the demands of life.
And I worry about that all the time, by the way. Just last night, we were talking about this again, where my daughter is obsessed with getting these Lululemon, like they're obsessed with labels because that's what their friends have. And now their friends they have to have the same branded clothing that their friends have. And we have these Uggs. They are actual Uggs that wife bought for my daughter, but it doesn't say Uggs. It has this other brand on it with like, blah, 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 buy Uggs. One of her friends was just like, they're not real Uggs. So now she wants the real Uggs. And then I think to myself, like, when I was growing up, and I think, we both have immigrant parents. So we grew up with like no amenities. And then I do wonder that, of course, we want to have those nice things. We want to give those nice things to our children now that we can afford them. But then I do worry that like, it's not like they appreciate it. That simply is the new base level that I have set, right?
Yeah.
So we have simply just set the level much higher than it was for us. But it's not like they're like, oh, thanks for that. They're like, well, of course it is. And if you give them the knockoff clothing from TJ Maxx, they're like, no, it has to be the Lululemons, And I'm like, well, that's much more expensive, first of all. And second of all, it is also like, it's not like they appreciate having the nicer thing.
Yeah, it's the default.
Yeah. In the context of the family dynamic, because of these kids who have gotten all these things. And some of them, like Saxon, is just like 100% on board with the brainwashing of capitalism. And then you have Piper, who at least on paper is open to rejecting them, right?
I think you have the harder side of it because you have a daughter. And I think, stereotypes aside, girls do tend to care more about things like that. Right. So you probably are just getting started. But oh, sure. I personally have also complained that my child is too bougie, to which one of our mutual friends replied, and how do you think he got that way?
Right, of course.
And I said, yeah, point taken. I like nice things too.
I'm sure Mike White is a very rich person now. And I don't think that he is only criticizing other people. I'm sure he feels that he is now living at a level where, he was a struggling artist for many years, making very, very little indie movies. And he is now probably worth many, many millions of dollars. And he has his own house on Hawaii where they shot the first season of the show. And I'm sure he's much wealthier now than he was back then. And he probably has multiple homes now. I do think that it is a question we all ask, or I ask all the time. How are you able to remember the value of something once you have it easily? And that is something that we all struggle with, because then you're on that hedonic treadmill. It doesn't matter how good it is. You can't even appreciate it anymore. Right. And that's the struggle. And ideally, I think going to a resort is some kind of reset. That's maybe the ideal and not always the result.
Because wherever you go, there you are.
There you are. There you go. Circle. It all comes full circle. And yeah, I think Jacqueline falls into this, going back to that celebrity version I described before. Imagine she was always the least successful of her friends, and now she has all these things. People recognize her. How great is this? I have this attractive young husband. Everybody wants him, and I'm the one who's married to him. And then all of a sudden it's like, but what if I lose him? But what if I'm not young enough anymore? What if I don't get roles anymore? What if I'm not famous anymore? It's all things you can lose now just because you had them. One last character I wanted to bring in that I forgot to mention that ties into this as well is think about Gary or Greg, whatever his name is, his actual name is. But when we saw him with Tanya, he just found out he wasn't going to die from his cancer. Being with Tanya was a reawakening. He's like, oh my God, I was so depressed. And now
I forgot about the cancer. Yes.
And I was kind of disappointed that he turned so bad in season 2, even though being such a miserable guy at the beginning of season 1, they really seemed that they had these two oddballs had found a connection there. But of course, now we've learned that wasn't enough. He needed more. Even after he found Tanya, he got annoyed with her. But then she had money and he wanted the money. So now he has the money. By the way, we find out from Belinda's investigation, this happened a year earlier that Tanya died. So now we kind of know the time frame. Going back to the idea that Greg is also someone who got everything he wanted. And now he has a beautiful young girl on his arm. And he's still not happy, right? Because eventually nothing's going to cure this misery that he has. The spiritual misery of Greg. Okay, so then we get to the end. A few things to talk about here. First of all, Jacqueline and Valentine. I always felt, Sona, that she really was the one who wanted to hook up with him.
Yeah.
And she does that. I feel like when Valentine is dancing with Lori on the dance floor, she starts to get a little jealous of that. Of course, she gets the big prize by the end of the night, luring him back to the resort, and then, of course, back to her room. And she feels older. All those things I mentioned before, those kind of insecurities she has. Here's a young stud to make her feel young again. Of course, she also had those younger Russian women feeling jealous of her.
We've been talking a lot about the dynamic of these 3 women and whether it's a true, or at least I have, whether it's a true friendship or it's more superficial, and whether they really love each other as friends or not. And we do find out, and I think it was said earlier as well, that they go way, way back together. This puts a frenemies perspective onto it, a frenemies spin, and a very high school spin, I guess, like going back to the idea that they met when they were kids. Sometimes you get stuck in those patterns from when you were kids. And I would imagine this is something that could have happened in high school, that Lori would have a crush on somebody and then Jacqueline would end up making out with him, right? Like I could totally see that happening.
Oh, absolutely. This feels like it's a repeated dynamic for sure.
I was kind of sad to see it from that perspective. I maintain that these 3 ladies love each other and that they've been through a lot together, and that probably they really do know who the others are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And probably, as you said, these are patterns that are being repeated. I don't think Lori will be all that surprised when this comes out, if it does. But I wish that in middle age, they could be a little bit more loyal to each other.
Do we ever grow up, though? Do we ever outgrow our high school days?
It's an excellent question. I do think that instills a lot of patterns that it's hard to break free from. And I also think that it's hard to convince people that you're not that person that they used to know. So I think it's kind of a two-way street. I think sometimes you can't break out of it. And I think sometimes even when you have, people will refuse to see it. They've already put you in a certain box in their mind from when you were 14 years old, and there's no getting out of that box.
There's also the fact that when you are amongst those people, you revert to those behaviors. For me, I'm not saying really I do hang out with people I hung out with when I was in high school, not these type of contentious group dynamics, but I think about family dynamics where you have certain negative or positive, but usually negative family dynamics that you really don't like. And then all of a sudden, when everybody gets together, it's like within a few hours, everyone has slid right back into those roles. And there's just something about those dynamics playing again. And I think these three women are probably sliding right back into those earlier patterns.
Yes, agree.
All right, next, let's talk about Belinda and Pornchai. I know you wanted to talk about this one.
Oh, so sweet.
Yes, this was so sweet and just so funny because I was like, oh my God, she's going to blow it again. And she's still playing it off so casually. I'm like, is she going to let him stay and it's not going to get physical? It actually felt like that was potentially going to happen there. But I do like that when he comes out in the robe, her words are getting in her way like they always seem to be. But then she finally says, that was consent, by the way. I'm not sure if you do that here. It's kind of new for us. Yes. I like that whole idea of like having to ask for consent is like a new thing.
This bed, that bed, any bed, yes, whatever bed. Yeah, I exactly. Liked all of it.
Yeah, and then all that nervousness, just that little sweet smile he gives her to just, be like, it's okay. And then they finally hook up. All right, way to go, Belinda and Pornchai. And Rick is back in the hotel after having this very strange night. By the way, going back to that, I like the way that, especially the final shot of them having their drinks, one drinking tea, one drinking whiskey, that the whole thing is shot through like the glass wall of the hotel. So there's a very prismatic effect, like these two characters almost blurred together. I thought that was really cool.
And a very pretty hotel as well.
Beautiful. Like what a beautiful lobby. Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm sure you find a lot of really beautiful places to shoot out there.
Agree.
We see explicitly that he has that gun. He finally tries to call Chelsea. Chelsea misses the call. She's now high and drunk and partying it up. And both at crossroads tonight as to, his transgressions could be much worse than hers, obviously killing somebody. But they're both at a crossroad tonight. Once again, like you were saying earlier, I do hope Chelsea does not hook up with Saxon. That would be just because he's there, because she doesn't really like him. And I think she really wants to be with Rick. And
she wouldn't be the first person to hook up with somebody just because they're there.
True. Good point.
But she does seem to have a true love for Rick. So hopefully not. Maybe
she'll see the missed call, and then she'll have a second thought about it. And then, of course, we end things with Tim really nearly shooting himself. I mean, they really dragged this out so much. I thought he might actually shoot himself. It was pretty shocking, actually. And then interrupted.
Writing a note as well.
While reading the note, I'd love to see what the note said. Did you read could you make out any of the note he was?
I think it said, I'm sorry, I love you all. I think that's what I was able to see.
Well, Victoria wakes up and interrupts him. And he tells her that you don't understand all the pressure I'm under. Of course, this is self-imposed. I'm pretty sure that as disappointed and as terrible as the fallout would be or will be of all of this, his family doesn't want him to kill himself, obviously, but he can't see that because it seems like the easy way out of this situation. And I think that it's interesting that Victoria is trying to be encouraging to him, going like, oh, you've already accomplished so much. You don't have to put all this pressure on yourself. And she thinks she's being encouraging without realizing that the whole day, all of her judgmental attitude that things have to be exactly as they were, any little change in even the perception of them is a catastrophe in her own estimation. And him imagining, well, what if everything changed? Is Victoria going to be able to accept this? And I think eventually she will, but of course he is, it's only adding to this stress he's under and maybe making him feel even more trapped.
Obviously what Timothy did was wrong, but I really feel for him here. I think to be that close to actually pulling the trigger, it looks very, very close. Yeah. He is in a very dark place. He, I think, feels very alone in it because of what we've talked about. He doesn't think that his family can handle this and doesn't want to let them down. I honestly, as I've said many times, I like this character and I'm interested in this character and finding out what happens to him and how he deals with it. I don't think he's going to actually end his life, though.
No, I don't think so either, because it doesn't tie into what we know is going to happen in the finale. And it would be too big to happen at this moment. Although, like I said, they did a very good job of holding this for so long that I was like, oh my God, is he actually going to do
Right.
this? Which would be
Mm-hmm.
truly a shocking state of affairs. And it would change the dynamic of the show from this point on for sure, because that would be like a ripple across all these other storylines
Yeah.
too. And as you mentioned earlier, we end with him praying, asking, what should I do? Very sad to see him at this moment, like really at the end of his rope. And the song, the show itself ends on this hymn, the hymn that he referenced
Mm-hmm.
earlier that he remembered from his youth, called "Lo, How a Rose Ever Blooming." And by the way, this is a Christmas hymn about a rose, the rose coming back from a dead stump every single year. The rose comes back. And of course, that's the resurrection of Christ. But I think more importantly, it's the idea of coming back from what looks like the end. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that Tim does need a new life. Not maybe, he certainly needs a new life. And maybe he'll find the strength to make it or build it with his family, hopefully. And that's where we end it for the episode.
I have two stray thoughts that really are disconnected to the episode itself, but I just want to
Do it.
ask.
Let's hear it.
One that I've been meaning to bring up since the first episode, so it feels a little bit stale now, but I wanted to ask you about it. You know, all the drama about giving up the phones. We
Mm-hmm.
specifically see that Timothy has a Pixel phone, and
Yeah.
that reminded me, have you heard this thing about Apple won't let bad guys have iPhones?
I haven't heard that. No.
There's this idea, I don't know if it's just like an urban legend, that like Apple won't agree to let characters that are villains or do bad things have iPhones. And so I don't know if it's true or not, but it just is something that crossed my mind when they specifically showed that he has a Pixel phone.
I think
So
that
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 was,
is. I just want to jump
mhm.
on that. I think that might be a that might be not an urban legend, but like maybe a misnomer or incorrectly attributed because of the fact that what is interesting on the Apple TV shows is if you notice all the devices on Apple TV shows, of course we watch a lot of them here, are Apple devices.
So certainly
And I
bad
think
guys
that's the
have
case
them.
with even the bad guys. They have like MacBooks
Mhm.
and stuff. So I think that that might not be
Okay.
true. But it does remind me of something very interesting, which is on Severance. Somehow they got Apple to accept the fact that they do not have Apple devices. I think it's because that they wanted to set it up as not putting not connecting it to the real world in some ways. And
Mhm.
at one point earlier on in that show, of course, not even specifically telling us what era we might be in. But I do find that interesting. But you will notice on all the Apple shows that everybody has, there's always an Apple logo somewhere. It's
Interesting.
like free advertising for their products.
Well, in connection with Severance is interesting because kind of the font that they use sometimes is a
Mm-hmm.
very
Yeah.
Apple-ish font. Do you know what
Yeah.
I'm
The
talking
Severance
about?
itself, right? Looks like
Right.
it could be like an Apple ad.
Okay, so my other thought was, and it really just a question, this whole idea of the full moon party, and there was a gorgeous shot of the full moon. Do you
Yeah.
remember?
Pretty
With
fake, I think, but yes,
Do you
beautiful. Yeah.
think it was fake? I was
Yeah. Yeah.
wondering because it was breathtaking if it was real, but if it was fake, eh.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think things are different when there's a full moon? Have you ever noticed the moon cycle?
I don't believe. I mean, we just had a full moon this week, right? We had the a lunar eclipse on
We did.
Friday,
Yeah.
uh, or overnight on Friday, and yeah, I don't think so. I mean, we all were sick, but that was viral. I don't think it had anything to do with the moon. I don't believe in the moon having all this potential power. Although, I mean, it could just be because people believe it. But there is that, and this might be apocryphal also. But the idea that there's more visits to the emergency
Right.
room when there's a full
Right.
moon, and there's more car accidents, and there's more whatever. It could just be because people give themselves the leeway to act more badly
Right.
because they assume that that's the case. The way that people remember when something bad happens on Friday the 13th, although there's no indication that more accidents or anything happen on that day. So some of it might just be that, but I don't believe it. Do you? Do you have any connection
I've
to the moon?
never paid much attention to the moon cycle except for, looking up in the sky when I'm outside and saying, oh, the moon looks pretty tonight.
Right.
Maybe if I tracked it, I would notice some kind of correlation. I don't know. For a while, when things would go, when you just have one of those days when nothing went right, my excuse was Mercury must be in retrograde, just because I thought it was a funny thing to say, not because I really believed it was because Mercury was in retrograde. But people do seem to put a lot of stock into that particular one, by the way.
I hear that the millennials are really into astrology, right?
Is that right? Maybe that's where I'm hearing it. Yeah, so it just made me wonder if you'd ever noticed any correlation between the moon cycle and your life.
Other than turning into a wolf, I don't, it's all
Yeah, well,
casual
that,
for
of
me.
course, right.
I have to be chained to the floor for a couple of days. But other than that,
Kind of inconvenient.
I just call that sick. It's not a big deal.
More time for podcasting.
That's true, but my diction is horrible when I'm a wolf. Wait till you hear the reviews. Yeah, so that is where we leave it. Oh, something I didn't bring up, but was all over the headlines. Jason Isaacs, the actor, won't say if it was a prosthetic or not. But did you hear about this? Like him flashing last week?
Yes, and we had more full frontal male nudity this
we did. Right. Yes, true.
Which we also didn't mention because now I think it's become par for the course for White
It's just
Lotus.
an episode. Every episode has it.
Faze us anymore that there was full frontal male nudity. I had not heard about it being a prosthetic, actually.
So the whole headline was that he was on some show. It was one of the big shows, like one of these morning shows, Good Morning America, or one of those. I could be misattributing it. And the interviewer, who was a woman, asked him whether it was a prosthetic or not. And he took offense to it, saying what a double standard. Men get to be asked this question, and you don't ask Margaret Qualley about being naked in the substance or any of these other things. It's okay. And I kind of agree with this, by the way, that I feel like a question like that is such a specific question, probably wouldn't be asked of women. And then there was a huge social media reaction basically saying you think women don't get asked about their bodies? What are you talking about?
That is my reaction as well.
So, but I do agree with him to one extent that if Margaret Qualley was on that show, they wouldn't start asking her about specific body parts in the substance, but where she's very naked, by the way, if you haven't seen that yet. I agreed with him to an extent, but I did think that his blanket statement that women don't get judged this way is hilarious because, of course, culturally, women are judged this way all the time.
It's two different things. The examination of the body and the speculation about it is something that women have been enduring forever. And the translation would be oh, do you think she has implants? Do you think it's a body double? Do you, she looks like she's gained weight, whatever it may be. Yes, I suppose asking about it in an interview, it's a different stage of that. And he might have a point there.
There's another famous viral clip, speaking of Michael Fassbender, which is talked about Black Bag. He did a movie called Shame, a very good performance on his part, by the way, maybe my favorite performance of his, but he does full frontal there. And he is, large, let's say. And in this interview, the person just started asking him about it. And he was like, what are you talking? Why are you having this conversation with me? He got very offended by people asking, that type of question. And it did remind me of this particular case. In his case, he was getting more affronted to that's all you're going to ask me about, as opposed to in this circumstance, I take his point. Having such a pointed conversation, no pun intended, about his genitalia, and maybe that is something that you wouldn't expect to see with a female interviewee. But I did think he took it too far when he starts saying, you don't ask women about their bodies. I'm what are you talking about? These women are under a microscope, obviously. Literally what the substance is about. Demi Moore is very naked in one scene, and the camera really shows every flaw in her body. She still looks incredible, by the way, but obviously she has an older body, so the camera does linger on and it's her judging herself negatively. Obviously, that's literally what the film is about. I think you can make a whole movie about something like that. So, which of course women have to deal with, especially in the entertainment industry. All right. So we have, what is this, 3 more episodes of this show?
I think that's right.
So we have, of course, Severance finale. I saw the first 2 episodes of Dope Thief. Very entertaining, by the way, Sona. I do recommend if you want to check it out. Maybe something you watch with your husband. He might appreciate it as well. And we'll be discussing that later this week. And of course, wrapping up Severance. Expect a video episode of that, everybody. Thanks for subscribing to YouTube.
Yay.
That's where you'll find it. And even if you don't subscribe, we will include it in the show notes when we publish that episode. So you can just click the link and watch it without subscribing. But of course, subscribe and get that notification. We love your feedback, of course, on YouTube, on email, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. And have you ever been to a full moon party? Send us an email. Love to hear about it. So, Sona, we'll touch base again later this week.
Right. In a few days.
In a few days. Yeah, that's right. All right. Can't wait for that finale, by the way.
Yeah, it should be a big one, right? It's supersized.
That's right. We got confirmation. Contradictory things, by the way. I announced it was 76 minutes long last week based on some article. Apple then had a press release saying, no, it's only 44 minutes long. And then Ben Stiller, who directed the episode and, of course, edited it as well, on his Twitter said it's 76 minutes long. So I think he knows how long it is. So I'll go with that.
It's a weird thing for there to be confusion over now.
Don't understand how they could be wrong about how they could have two different answers to this. But
yeah,
anyway.
That's so strange. Like, was someone at Apple just kind of like, they tend to be around 45 minutes long. I'll just
exactly. I guess maybe the AI generated it based on the averages from before. Who knows? But don't send that as a press release if you're wrong. Do verify your facts at least, please. Anyway, we will see. It's going to be a supersized conversation with us as well. But
yeah,
look forward to that. And I'll talk to you soon, Sona.
Talk to you soon.
Hey.